March 15th, 44, the assassination of Julius Caesar. And of course, immediately afterwards, nobody knows what to do. You can read Cicero's wonderful letters about the assassination and more on the people meeting. He writes to his friend Atticus and tells about the Romans meeting and talking about what to do. They don't know what to do. There is no leader. Brutus isn't a leader. He's the nominal leader, but he's clearly not a real leader. While this is going on, in the months after March, he goes to his villa and he writes 3 great books. One on old age, he wasn't very old, on friendship, wonderful book, and on duties, the greatest of them all, De Officiis. In March 44, Mark Antony goes and gives his funeral oration. Friends, Romans, and countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. At that moment, of course, Mark Antony's a hero. Caesar's dead. He's the closest figure to Caesar. He inherits his leadership role. And so now for the next 20 years, he and the whole generation are going to fight it out right down to about 30. It's becoming pretty clear. Actium is 31 BC, so we could say that by 30 it's pretty clear who's emerging, but that's still 15 years of civil war. With the death of Caesar and with Cicero's retirement to his villa, he writes, then in 43, so 6, 7, 8 months, having watched every single thing that's happening, decides to go back to Rome. Now, everybody knows he's out of Rome. Everybody knows who Cicero is. Everybody knows the power structure that's emerging. Mark Antony is essentially in charge of the army, so he's in charge of everything. And he's letting loose his real nature, which is tyranny. Everything's under the thumb of the military. The troops are all around the city. That's contrary to every tradition of Rome. That's not supposed to be. And so Cicero decides that he's the only voice still alive who can speak out against it. So he comes back to Rome. He comes right down this road. This is the road between, here's the Palatine over here. This is the Caelian Hill over there where St. Gregory the Great lived. Came right down this little Via San Gregorio street. It's a beautiful little street. And there's the Arch of Constantine. It wasn't there when he came through, but he certainly came through. Here's his car. This is what he was coming in from the villa, driving his Bentley. Here he turns left. Now, the whole road is lined with Romans. Thousands and thousands and thousands of Romans know he's coming back. So there's all these people who've come, and everybody hears Cicero's coming back, Cicero's coming back. So people come, and he comes down the road, and everybody's waving and cheering and saying, hurrah, hurrah, Cicero, great, welcome back, welcome back. And so then he comes, makes a left turn right here and starts down through the Forum there, right down that path, the Via Sacra, right through there, and then into the Senate building, which is right here. And there he goes. There he is in the Senate building, speaking. Of course, everybody knew that he was coming. Everybody knew he was going to speak out against Mark Antony, and the place is full of people. And of course, they're basically powerless. The Senate at this moment is basically powerless. It's meeting. It's still a couple hundred men, but they know they have no power because the army is all around the city, so there's really no independent government power. It's Mark Antony's absolute total control, which of course is the opposite of everything everybody dreamed would happen after the assassination. They thought they were stopping the Julius Caesar tyranny, and they end up with a worse one under Mark Antony. So he comes back, comes in the Senate building, and begins his great speech called the Second Philippic, but there's a number of them, so they're now called the Second Philippics with an S on it. 2 of them are really the greater, and all of them are published later. So he would have given a multi-hour oration, but already he would have had the text written down and ready to publish it. And so then that's circulating all over Rome in the next day. So everybody in Rome is reading the Philippics. Here is the text. Now, we have the text because, of course, it survived. It was the most famous set of speeches anybody had ever given. And everybody knew in 42 what had happened. He was dead by then. So everybody knew in the long run, 42, 41, 40, that Cicero had died speaking truth to power. You've heard that phrase, right? Speak truth to power. Well, this was the ultimate. Before, Senators, I say these things concerning the Republic, which I think myself bound to say at the present time, I will explain to you briefly the cause of my departure from and of my return to the city. When I hoped that the Republic was at last recalled to a proper respect for your wisdom and your authority, I thought it became me to remain in a sort of sentinelship, meaning he retired, he went out, he left. Now he meant that as, 44, March, April 44. Nor did I depart anywhere, far away, nor did I ever take my eyes off of Rome and the Republic from the day in which we were summoned to meet, meaning right after the assassination. As far as I was in my power, laid the foundations of peace, renewed the ancient precedent set up by the Athenians. I even used the Greek word which that city employed in those times, trying to, in other words, he's talking about the immediate aftermath of the assassination. To what destiny of mine shall I say that it is owing that none for the last 20 years, this is true, now this Mary Beard interpretation, tooting his own horn, will come into play here, but it's absolutely true. To what destiny of mine shall I say it's owing that none for the last 20 years has been an enemy to the Republic without the same time declaring war on me? Well, it was true. It's true since the 60s. He's been fighting for the Republic. He fought with both Pompey and Caesar, hoping he could move them, failing. And then in the 45 and 44, leading up the assassination, he was in constant touch with Brutus and the other people, trying to convince him. So nor is there any necessity for naming any particular person. You yourselves recollect instances in proof of what I just said. All have hitherto suffered severe punishments that I could wish for. But I marvel that you, Mark Antony, do not fear the end of those men whose conduct you're imitating. Now, some of the people talking to me about this when you came in tonight said, I just can't believe that you would talk like this to this man in the Senate like this. Well, you're right. Hardly any speech anywhere like this. I mean, it's really, nobody today makes a speech like this. But you who have never been injured by me, not even by a word, in order to appear more audacious than the Catiline conspiracy, more frantic than Clodius, these have been his enemies, have of your own accord attacked me with abuse and have considered that your alienation from me would be a recommendation of you to impious citizens. What am I to think? That I've been despised. In other words, all these enemies I've got. I see nothing in my life or my influence or in my exploits or even in the moderate abilities which I'm endowed. Now, of course, that's a little bit of modesty. Yes, I know he really wasn't a modest person, but come on, let him get away with it. So, with which I am endowed, which Mark Antony can despise. Did he think that it was easiest to disparage me in the Senate? Now, he's been disparaging Cicero for a long time. A body which has borne its testimony in favor of many most illustrious citizens that they govern the Republic well. Or did he wish to contend with me in a rivalry of eloquence? Now, this is a very nasty, hilarious little proposal because everyone in the room now is murmuring, ha, 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 because they know Cicero is as smart as they come and witty and a great speech maker, and they know Mark Antony is a brute. So nobody thinks Mark Antony is going to do well in a battle of wits. If it's wrestling, he'll pin poor old wimpy Cicero with one hand, but if it's wit, he won't. This, in fact, is the truth. He thought it impossible to prove to the satisfaction of those men who resemble himself that he was an enemy to his country if he was not also an enemy to me. So in other words, these guys set up their enmity to Cicero to show off. And before I make him any reply, Mark Antony, on other topics, I will say a few words respecting the friendship formerly subsisting between us, which he's accused me of. So in other words, Mark Antony said all kinds of things about Cicero being bad and doing this and being mean to him and all things. Mark Antony accuse the Senate, accuse the equestrian body, accuse every order of society and all the citizens, as long as you confess. In other words, he's saying right here to Mark Antony, who's sitting in the room, go ahead, accuse the Senate, accuse everybody, but first admit that at this very moment, this whole assembly is besieged by your soldiers, is not so much a proof of audacity to advance these statements so impudently as of other want of sense to be unable to see the contrary nature. For what is more insane than, after you've taken up arms, to reproach another for having taken them up? In other words, Mark Antony is accusing these people of taking up arms, and Cicero is saying, are you kidding? You've got your army around the whole city. What are we supposed to do? We've got to fight. On one occasion, you attempted even to be witty. Oh, he's just merciless in what he's saying this to Mark Antony. Mark Antony's sitting right there, and with lots of friends, lots of buddies over on his side. On one occasion, you attempted to be witty. Oh, ye good gods, how little did that attempt suit you? And yet you are a little to be blamed for your failure in that instance, for you might have got some wit from your wife. It's so funny, because of course now he's going to besmirch the wife too, who was an actress. Arms to the gown must yield, meaning, between arms and a beautiful gown, the gown wins. Well, have they yielded yet? Meaning, have the gowns of the ladies have they won? But afterwards, the gown yielded to your arms. Isn't that witty? See? That's funny in English. He's translated, but in Latin it's even better. Let us inquire then whether it was better for the arms of the wicked men to yield to the freedom of the Roman people, or that our liberty should be yielding to your arms. So always play on the word arm, etc. But you stupidest of all men, do you not perceive that it is a crime to have wished that Caesar should be slain, which you accuse me of having wished? Then it is a crime also to rejoice at his death, which Mark Antony was now pretending to do with the crowd. He's doing that to get in with the Roman crowd. For what is the difference between a man who has advised an action and one who has approved of it? Or what does it signify whether I wish to be done or rejoice that it has been done? Is there anyone then, except you yourself, who was unwilling that the deed should be done, or who disapproved of it after it was done? All men, therefore, are guilty, as far as this goes. In truth, all good men, as far as it depended on them, bore a part in the slaying of Caesar. That's a brilliant historical paragraph to hold on to, because here's Cicero, 1 year later, retrospecting on the whole event and saying, everybody wanted it done. Everybody, he means, in the leadership circle in Rome. And that's, of course, the way Shakespeare portrays it. Some did not know how to contrive it. Some had not courage for it. Some had no opportunity, but everyone had the inclination. Consider just for a little while as if you were sober. It's so funny. I, who as myself confess, am an intimate friend of those men, and as you accuse me, an accomplice, meaning the assassins, deny that there's any medium between these alternatives. He's talking about the assassination. I confess that they, if they be not deliverers of the Roman people and saviors of the Republic, are worse than assassins, worse than homicides, worse even than parricides, since atrocious thing to murder the father of one's country. So in other words, he's saying, these assassins hope that they have delivered us from tyranny, and that's what they thought they were doing. But you, wise and considerate man, what do you say to this? If they are parricides, why are they always named by you, both in this assembly and before the Roman people, with a view to do them honor? Why has Marcus Brutus been, on your motion, excused from obedience to the laws? Why were the games of Apollo celebrated with incredible honor for Brutus? We're talking about Brutus. Why were provinces given to Brutus and Cassius? These would be assassins, Brutus and Cassius. Why were quaestors assigned to them? Why was the number of their lieutenants augmented? In other words, he's nominating all these actions by Mark Antony, suggesting you're just as involved in this as anybody else. You're just as involved as everybody else. You were there from the beginning. You knew what was going on. You may have even been plotting with them. That's a big question in history. We're not sure. And he's saying to his face, with everybody listening, so here's the sum total of my conclusion, that since they are acquitted by you of wickedness, they are at the same time pronounced most worthy of the very most honorable rewards, meaning Mark Antony's going to see that they get rewards. But one thing I'm afraid you may not approve of, For if I'd really been one of their number, I should have not only got rid of the king, but of the kingly power also out of the republic. And if I'd been the author of the piece, as it is said, believe me, I should not have been contented with one act, but should have finished the whole play. Meaning Mark Antony. Although if it be a crime to wish that Caesar might be put to death, beware, I pray you, O Mark Antony, of what must be your own case, as it is notorious that you, when at Narbo, formed a plan of the same sort with Caius Trebonius, and it was on account of your participation in that design when Caesar was being killed, we saw you called aside by Trebonius, but see how far I am from any horrible inclination. But praise you for having once in your life had a righteous intention. I return your thanks for not having revealed the matter, and I excuse you for not having accomplished your purpose. That required a man. It's terrible. He's suggesting that Mark Antony was involved all along, had plotted even earlier for an attempt, and his prancing around, constantly delivering these encomiums to Caesar, is a big act. That's what he's saying. However, this is so funny. He's, just pointed out Mark Antony is a crook and a liar, but then he says, however, we'll say nothing of these things, which are more hardly sort of villainy. Let us speak rather of your meaner actions, you with those jaws of yours and those sides of yours and that strength of body suited to a gladiator, drank such quantities of wine at the marriage of Hippia that you were forced to vomit the next day in the sight of the Roman people. Well, Mark Antony was definitely known at his time and ever since as most probably an alcoholic. That is, he drank heavily every day. And so there's lots of stories of him getting drunk and doing all kinds of things. So here he is, a man holding a public office, a master of the horse, to whom it would have been disgraceful even to belch. He's saying back in the old days, in the old Republic days, it would have been disgraceful even to belch, let alone thinking of vomiting on his own bosom. And everybody sees him reeking with wine. But he himself confesses this among his other disgraceful. Consider, I beg you, Mark Antony, do some time or other consider the Republic. Think of the family of which you are born and of the men with whom you're living. Be reconciled to the Republic. However you decide in your conduct, as to mine, I myself will declare what that shall be. I defended the Republic as a young man. I will not abandon it now that I'm old. I scorned the sword of Catiline. I will not quail before yours. No, I'll rather cheerfully expose my own person if the liberty of the city can be restored by my death. So he knows here he's writing his obituary. He retired from Rome. He went home after this fall, September, October 43, went back to his villa. Within just days, friends came running to him and said, you have to get out of Italy because you're on the list of those to be assassinated. Mark Antony and Octavian had made up a list of 2,000, and everybody on it was going to be executed. And it all happens in just like 24 hours. They go all night. They drag people from their houses and just kill them and leave them in the streets. And he's on the list. He's the number one person on the list. So the soldiers come roaring down the highway. His servants put him on a litter. He's sick, and they carry him down to the water. And they see the soldiers coming, and he says, get away, everybody get away, run to the forest. They don't want you, they want me. And they refuse to leave, and he just screamed at them, get out, get out. One person still was staying there when the soldiers come running up on him. So he just put his head out from the litter, and the soldier took his great big sword and just decapitated him right there. Then, at the order of Mark Antony, once he was dead, December 7th, 43 BC, they cut off his hands that had written the Philippics and brought them to the Forum and nailed them to a post in front of the Senate. Think of that. Think of the statement that made about the brutality of the rule of Mark Antony, that in order to sum up Cicero, they would nail up his hands to a post and say, nobody else is ever going to deliver a speech like this. Look what happens. And there they were, for weeks and weeks, the bloody hands of Cicero. Barbarous and hateful. And that is 43 BC. There he is. That's his statue in the Forum. I always think of his hands when I see this statue. And that's the end of the story.